There's a small plastic tube sitting in a kitchen drawer in Ohio right now. A mother put it there years ago, just in case her son ever bites the wrong cookie. That same tube was designed to keep an American soldier alive after a Soviet nerve gas attack. Same device, same button. The same 3 seconds that stand between a living body and a dead one. You've probably held one. Maybe you carry one in your bag. Maybe you've watched someone press it hard into a child's thigh and count out loud and pray. But almost nobody knows where it really came from. Not the pharmacy, not the allergy clinic. It came from a battlefield that never happened. A war we spent 30 years getting ready for and never had to fight. How a weapon of the Cold War ended up inside a lunchbox is a stranger story than any drug company will ever put on the label. It runs through a German lab, a dead dog on a rich man's yacht, and one quiet engineer whose name you have never heard. This is the untold history of the EpiPen. Let's start with the moment everybody's afraid of. Because you already know it, even if it never happened to you. A boy sits down at a lunch table, 8 years old, maybe 9. He trades half his sandwich for a friend's cookie, the way kids do. He takes one bite, and within a minute something is wrong. His lips feel thick. His throat feels like a hand is closing around it from the inside. He tries to tell the teacher and the words come out wrong, small like they're being squeezed. His skin goes blotchy and red. He can't get a full breath. His body has decided, all on its own, to shut the doors. If you're a parent, you've imagined this. If you're a grandparent, you've probably lived a version of it, sitting in a waiting room watching a doctor's face instead of a chart. You know that particular kind of fear. The kind where you'd trade anything, your house, your years, your own breath, to fix it right now. Here's the strange part. The thing that saves that boy is not gentle. It's not a pill that works over an hour. It's a needle full of a hormone your own body makes when you're terrified. The same chemical that floods your chest when you slam the brakes on the highway. The same rush that let a small woman lift a car off a trapped child, back in some story your father told you. That's the medicine. We take the exact substance the body pours out in a moment of panic, and we put it in a tube, and we teach a shaking parent to punch it into a child's thigh. They call it epinephrine now, in America. The rest of the world calls it adrenaline, same molecule. 2 names. And the fight over those 2 names, believe it or not, is where this whole story actually begins. 2 scientists, 2 continents, both convinced they'd found it first. We'll get there. But stay in the cafeteria with me for one more second, because I want you to notice something we almost never stop to think about. That boy is going to live. Not because of luck, not because someone was brave, though someone was. He's going to live because of a device that fits in a coat pocket and works in 3 seconds and does not require a doctor, a nurse, a clean room, or a single ounce of medical training. A frightened teacher can do it. A 12-year-old babysitter can do it. That's not an accident of good design. That is the entire point of the design. And the reason it works that way, the reason it's so brutally simple, has almost nothing to do with allergies. It has to do with war. Because before this device was ever aimed at a peanut, it was aimed at something far worse. Something invisible, odorless, and built in a laboratory on purpose. The engineers who made this little tube were not thinking about a cafeteria in Ohio. They were thinking about a soldier in a field in Germany watching a cloud drift toward him, with maybe 60 seconds to save his own life before his own nerves turned against him. Same problem when you really look at it. A body attacking itself, a clock running out, a person alone with no doctor in reach, and one tool that has to work the very first time, every time, in the worst moment of someone's life. Now, most people, when they hear adrenaline, they picture a heart-pounding movie scene. They don't picture chemistry. But this hormone is one of the most quietly important discoveries in the history of medicine, and hardly anyone knows the names of the people who found it. We know Edison, we know Ford. We don't know the men who first pulled adrenaline out of an animal gland and changed emergency medicine forever. I think that's worth fixing. So over the next hour, I'm going to walk you through 3 separate accidents, 3 moments where someone was looking for one thing and stumbled onto something else entirely. A doctor trying to make a vaccine, who instead discovered how the body can kill itself. A chemist trying to build a better bug spray, who instead built one of the deadliest weapons ever made. And an engineer trying to save soldiers, who instead saved children. None of them were working on the same problem. None of them knew each other, and somehow all three of their accidents ended up inside that one small tube in that kitchen drawer in Ohio. Let's go back to the very first accident, a yacht. A rich man's yacht in the Mediterranean in the summer of 1901, and a dog that was about to teach the world something nobody wanted to learn. The summer of 1901, a yacht owned by Prince Albert I of Monaco, drifting through the warm water of the Mediterranean. On board is a French scientist named Charles Richet. He is not on vacation. He is doing experiments at sea on the prince's dime, and he is about to make one of the great mistakes in the history of medicine. The kind of mistake that wins you a Nobel Prize. Richet is studying a poison, the venom of a sea creature, a kind of jellyfish relative. And he's asking a reasonable question, the same question scientists were asking all over Europe in those years. If I give an animal a tiny dose of a poison, does its body learn to fight it? Does it build up a defense? That was the great hope of the age. It was how the first vaccines worked. A small taste of the enemy, and the body remembers, and next time it's ready. So Richet gives his dogs a small, non-fatal dose of the venom. Nothing dramatic happens. The dogs survive. He waits a few weeks, lets their bodies do whatever they're going to do. Then he gives them a second dose, and here's what he expected. He expected the second dose to do less. He expected the dogs to be protected now, hardened, immune. The opposite happened. The second dose, a dose smaller than the first, killed them. Fast. Minutes. The dogs collapsed, couldn't breathe, went into shock, and died in front of him. Bodies that had survived the poison once were now being destroyed by a fraction of it. Sit with how strange that is. It's like a man who lifts 100 pounds on Monday with no trouble, and on Friday tries to lift 10 and it stops his heart. The exposure didn't make the body stronger, it made the body turn on itself. The immune system, the very thing that's supposed to protect you, had been trained by that first dose to overreact so violently to the second that the reaction itself was the thing that killed. Richet gave it a name. He built it from Greek. There was already a word, prophylaxis, meaning protection, meaning to guard before. So he took the opposite. Ana, meaning against or backward. Phylaxis, protection. Anaphylaxis, against protection. The undoing of the body's own defense. He won the Nobel Prize for it in 1913. And it's worth saying plainly what he discovered because it's the same thing happening in that boy in the cafeteria. Anaphylaxis is not the allergy. The peanut doesn't kill the child. The child's own immune system kills the child, in a panic, overreacting to something harmless as if it were venom on a yacht. The body mistakes a cookie for a mortal enemy and burns the house down to kill a spider. Now, as a physician, I'll tell you this is one of the hardest ideas to teach a patient, and one of the most important. Your immune system is not always your friend. It is a soldier with a hair trigger and no judgment. It does not check whether the threat is real. It only checks whether it has seen the pattern before. And once it decides a substance is the enemy, it will defend you to death. Richet understood the enemy. What he did not have, what nobody had yet, was the counterattack. He could name the way the body destroys itself. He could not stop it. A dog going into anaphylactic shock on that yacht in 1901 was a dead dog. There was nothing in the medical bag for it. Nothing. And here's the quiet tragedy sitting inside this discovery. The thing that could have saved those dogs already existed. It had already been pulled out of an animal gland in a laboratory in New York right around that very same time. The antidote to Richet's shock was being isolated, purified, and fought over by two other scientists on the other side of the ocean, and none of them knew what it was truly for. They thought they'd found a way to stop bleeding, and to raise blood pressure, and to help a struggling heart. They had no idea they were holding the one thing that could pull a body back from the exact abyss Richer had just discovered. That molecule was adrenaline, and the story of how it got its name and who really found it is a fight that got ugly. 2 men, 1 substance, and a wound that never quite healed. That's where we go next. To understand the fight over adrenaline, you have to go back a few years before that dog died on the yacht. Back to the 1890s, when nobody had ever held this substance in a pure form. They only knew it was in there, somewhere, hiding inside 2 small glands that sit on top of your kidneys like little caps. The adrenal glands, adrenal, on top of the kidney. That's all the name ever meant. Doctors already knew those glands mattered. They'd watch patients die when the glands failed, wasting away, blood pressure sinking to nothing. Something powerful was in there. But glands are messy. They're full of 100 different substances all mixed together, like trying to find one specific voice in a stadium full of people shouting. The trick, the prize, was to pull out the one substance that did the work, to isolate it, pure, alone. 2 men were closing in on it at the same time, and this is where it gets human. The first is John Jacob Abel, an American. A serious, respected professor at Johns Hopkins, one of the finest medical schools in the country. Abel had been grinding away at the adrenal glands for years, careful, methodical, the way a good scientist is supposed to be. And he got close. He pulled out a substance that had the right kind of activity. He gave it a name. Epinephrine. Again, straight from the Greek. Epi, on top of. Nephros, the kidney, on top of the kidney. The exact same meaning as adrenal, just in a different language. He published it. He put his flag in the ground. But Abel's version wasn't quite pure. It was close. It was a cousin of the real thing, chemically altered by his own process, not the clean molecule itself. So near and yet not it. The second man is Jokichi Takamine. And Takamine is one of those figures history almost forgot, which is a shame, because his life reads like a novel. A Japanese chemist, born in a country that had only just opened its doors to the West. He trained in Japan, then in Scotland, then built a career that carried him all the way to New York City. An immigrant, an outsider, working in a borrowed language in a foreign land. He had already made a fortune once, off an enzyme used in brewing and digestion. Now he turned his attention to the adrenal gland. Takamine visited Abel's lab. He saw the American's work, his methods, how close Abel had come. And then Takamine went back to his own laboratory with his assistant, a man named Keizo Uenaka, and refined the process. He found the step Abel had missed, and he pulled out the pure crystal. The real thing. Clean, stable, the actual molecule the body makes. He named it adrenaline. And he patented it. 1901. Now you can feel the problem coming. Abel had done the years of foundational work. Takamine had walked through Abel's lab, seen his approach, and then crossed the finish line first with a purer product and, crucially, a patent. Abel felt robbed. He believed the Japanese chemist had taken his methods and beaten him with them. That bitterness never fully went away. For the rest of his life, the question hung in the air. Who really discovered adrenaline? And here's the thing about that fight. It never got settled, and you're living inside the unsettled result right now without knowing it. Because in the United States, the official legal name of the drug became epinephrine, Abel's word. But almost everywhere else on Earth, and in common speech even here, people say adrenaline. Takamine's word, 2 names for one molecule, frozen in place by a rivalry from over a century ago. When you hear a doctor on an American TV show shout 1 milligram of Epi, that's John Jacob Abel's ghost. When the rest of the world says adrenaline, that's Takamine's. 2 men, 1 substance, a wound that outlived them both. But set the feud aside for a moment because it misses the deeper point. Neither of these men, not Abel, not Takamine, understood what they were really holding. They thought they had a tool to raise blood pressure and stop bleeding during surgery. A useful thing, a commercial thing. Takamine got rich off it. What they'd actually isolated was the antidote to Richet's shock, the one substance on Earth that could reach into a body in full anaphylactic collapse and reverse it. The counterattack to the immune system's suicide. It was sitting right there in a patented crystal, years before anyone connected it to that dying dog on the yacht. The pieces existed. Nobody had put them in the same room yet. That connection, the moment someone finally realized this crystal could pull a person back from the edge of death, is where we're headed next. So now you have two discoveries sitting on opposite sides of an ocean, and nobody has connected them yet. On one side, Charles Richet in France, who understood how the body kills itself. He had the disease. On the other side, Takamine and Abel in America, who had pulled a pure crystal out of an animal gland. They had the cure. They just didn't know it was a cure for anything urgent. To them, it was a surgical tool, a way to make blood vessels clamp down to keep a surgical field from bleeding, to prop up a failing blood pressure on the operating table. Useful, yes. Life-saving in the way a good scalpel is life-saving. But nobody had yet stood over a person dying of shock and thought to reach for it. The bridge between those two islands was built slowly by a lot of hands over the first decades of the 20th century. And it started with something a lot more common than a jellyfish on a yacht. It started with people who couldn't breathe, asthma. That was the doorway. Doctors in the early 1900s began giving adrenaline to patients in the grip of a severe asthma attack, and they watched something close to a miracle. A person wheezing, gasping, chest locked tight, would get an injection, and within minutes the airways would open. The whistling would ease, air would move again. It worked because adrenaline does something no other substance of that era could do all at once. It relaxes the muscle around the airways and opens them. It tightens the leaking blood vessels. It kicks the heart into a stronger rhythm. 3 effects, 1 molecule, all pointing in the same direction, keep this person alive and breathing. And once doctors saw adrenaline do that for asthma, a few of them started to wonder about the other emergencies. The sudden collapses, the mysterious deaths after a bee sting, or a shot of horse serum medicine, or a strange meal. The cases where a person went from fine to dying in the space of a few breaths, their skin flushing, their throat swelling, their blood pressure falling through the floor. That, of course, was Richet's anaphylaxis. Nobody in that emergency room was quoting a French Nobel laureate. They just saw a body in the same kind of catastrophic collapse they'd learned to reverse in asthma, and they reached for the same tool. And it worked. The molecule that opened an asthmatic's airways also reversed the shock. It was the antidote all along. Think about the strangeness of that. The cure was discovered before anyone fully understood the disease it would come to define. The key was cut before the world knew there was a lock this shape. Takamine patented that crystal in 1901, the same summer Richet's dogs were dying at sea, and it would take years for medicine to realize these two men had been working on opposite ends of the very same emergency. Here is the part I want you to hold on to because it matters for everything that comes after. For the first half of the 20th century, adrenaline was a hospital tool. It lived in a glass bottle in a doctor's bag in an emergency room. To use it, you needed a trained hand. You had to draw it up from an ampule into a glass syringe. You had to know the dose. You had to know where to put the needle and how deep and how fast. You had to be, in other words, a professional. And you had to be there in time. But anaphylaxis does not wait for a professional. It does not politely hold off until the patient reaches a hospital. It kills in minutes, and it usually strikes far from any doctor. In a restaurant, on a hiking trail, at a child's birthday party, in a school cafeteria in Ohio. The very places where there is no glass syringe, no trained hand, no time. So medicine had a cruel gap. It had the perfect antidote and no way to deliver it to the people who needed it most, in the moments they needed it most. A fire extinguisher locked in a cabinet that only the fire chief could open. And the fires were breaking out in kitchens and playgrounds nowhere near the chief. That gap, the distance between a life-saving drug and an ordinary frightened person, would sit unsolved for decades. And it would finally be closed from the most unlikely direction imaginable. Not by an allergy doctor, not by a pharmacist, but by the United States military, preparing for a war it prayed would never come. Because on the other side of the world, a chemist looking for a better way to kill insects had accidentally built a way to kill men. And stopping that weapon would require the exact same thing a dying allergic child would one day need. A drug. A frightened, untrained hand. And seconds. That's the next accident. 1936, Germany. A chemist named Gerhard Schroeder is sitting at a bench, and he is not thinking about war. He's thinking about beetles. Schroeder worked for a giant German chemical company, and his job was practical, almost boring. Find better insecticides. The world needed to protect its crops, and the old poisons weren't good enough. So Schroeder spent his days building new molecules, testing them on pests, looking for something that would kill an insect fast and cheap. Honest work, the kind of research that feeds people. He was working with a family of chemicals called organophosphates, and one day he mixed up a compound that did exactly what he wanted, and far more than he wanted. It killed insects at almost impossibly small doses. But it also did something to Schroeder and the people in his lab. Their vision started to fail. Their pupils shrank to pinpoints. They felt a crushing tightness in the chest, couldn't catch a breath, felt their own bodies going haywire. They had to stop work for weeks to recover. Schroeder had found something that killed insects beautifully. He had also, by accident, found one of the most toxic substances ever created by human hands. He called it tauben. 2 years later, he made an even deadlier cousin, and it was named from the initials of the men involved, Serene. Now notice the shape of this story, because you've heard it before in this very video. A man goes looking for one thing. He finds something else entirely, something far more powerful, hiding inside the same experiment. Takamine went looking for a surgical aid and found the antidote to shock. Richer went looking for immunity and found the mechanism of self-destruction. And Schrader went looking for a better bug spray and found a chemical weapon. The accident is the pattern. It keeps happening. The universe hands us answers to questions we never asked. Here is what makes these particular chemicals so terrible, and I'll explain it the way I'd explain it to a patient because the mechanism is the whole point. Your nerves talk to your muscles using a chemical messenger. A nerve fires, it releases the messenger, the muscle contracts, and then, this is the important part, a tiny cleanup crew immediately mops up the messenger so the signal switches off. Fire, contract, clear. Fire, contract, clear. Millions of times a day, cleanly, quietly, in your eyes, your gut, your lungs, your heart. Nerve agents destroy the cleanup crew. The messenger never gets mopped up. So the signal never switches off. Every muscle keeps getting the order to fire over and over with nothing to stop it. The pupils clamp down. The lungs fill with fluid and seize. The gut cramps. The whole body convulses because every nerve is screaming at once and cannot stop screaming. A person poisoned this way drowns in their own secretions while their muscles tear themselves apart. It can happen in minutes. And Schroeder, the man who wanted to kill beetles, had built the machine that does this to human beings. The German government took his accident away from him and turned it into a weapon of the state. Stockpiles were built. Thankfully, for reasons still debated by historians, those weapons were never unleashed on the battlefields of that war. But the knowledge did not die when the war ended. It was captured, it was studied, it was copied and improved. Within a decade, chemists in Britain, following the very same trail Schrader had blazed while hunting insecticides, would stumble onto an even deadlier agent. And both East and West would spend the coming decades building these poisons by the ton, aiming them at each other across a divided Europe. Which brings us to the soldier. Picture him now, a young American stationed in West Germany in the 1960s or 70s. The Cold War is not a metaphor to him, it is his job. And part of his training is the thing nobody likes to talk about. What happens if the enemy uses the gas? He knows the answer is somewhere in his own body. Because there is an antidote, a drug that can block the runaway signal and buy him time. But here is his problem, and it should sound painfully familiar by now. The antidote does him no good in a bottle. It does him no good if it needs a doctor, a clean room, a steady hand, a glass syringe. When the cloud comes, he will have seconds, not minutes. He will be alone, or nearly. His hands may already be shaking from the first touch of the poison, and he will have to save his own life, right there in the dirt, with no help coming. The exact same gap that left an allergic child undefended in a cafeteria now left a soldier undefended in a field. Two completely different emergencies, the same impossible problem. And the man who finally solved it worked for neither the allergy clinic nor the army. He was an engineer. That's who we meet next. His name was Sheldon Kaplan. And I'd bet everything that you have never heard it. That's the quiet injustice at the center of this whole story. We remember the men who fought over adrenaline's name. We remember the Nobel laureate on the yacht. We even remember the chemist who built the poison. But the man who actually put the life-saving tool into your hands, the one whose invention has saved more ordinary people than any of them, worked in near-total anonymity and died that way. Kaplan was an engineer at a company in Maryland called Survival Technology, and by the late 1960s, that company had a military contract to solve exactly the problem we just left the soldier standing in. How do you let a frightened, possibly already poisoned man deliver his own antidote in the field in seconds with no training and no doctor? Think about what that job actually demands, because the requirements are brutal. The device has to work with one hand because the other hand might be useless. It has to work through a uniform because there's no time to find bare skin. It has to work for a man whose fingers are trembling and whose vision is going dark. It cannot involve drawing up a dose or aiming a needle or knowing anything about medicine. It has to be as simple as pressing a button. And it has to work the very first time, every single time, because there is no second attempt when you're dying in a field. Now here's the engineering insight that made Kaplan special, and it's so simple it's easy to miss. The hard part was never the drug. The drug already existed. The hard part was the delivery. The gap in medicine was never a missing molecule. It was a missing bridge between the molecule and the ordinary human hand. So Kaplan built the bridge, a spring-loaded tube. You pull off a cap, you press the end against your thigh, and a hidden needle drives itself into the muscle and pushes the dose, all in one motion, all from that single press. No glass, no aiming, no dose to measure. The needle stays hidden before and after, so a panicking person never has to see it or fear it. You press, you hold, you count. That's it. The first version was built for the military antidotes, atropine and a second drug to reverse the nerve agent's damage, packaged so a soldier could jab himself right through his gear the moment the alarm sounded. It worked. It became standard issue. Soldiers carried Kaplan's invention into every chemical threat of the Cold War and beyond, and most of them never knew the name of the man who designed the thing clipped to their belt. And then came the leap. The leap that turns this from a war story into your story. Somebody, and the beauty of it is how obvious it seems in hindsight, looked at this military device and saw the other emergency. The civilian one, the bee sting, the peanut, the child in the cafeteria. Because when you strip both emergencies down to their bones, they are the same problem wearing different clothes. A body in sudden catastrophic collapse. A drug that can reverse it. An untrained, terrified person as the only one present. And seconds, not minutes, on the clock. The soldier needed atropine through a uniform in the dirt. The allergic child needed adrenaline through blue jeans on a cafeteria floor. Different poison, different antidote, but the exact same delivery problem. And Kaplan had already solved the delivery problem. All that was left was to load his device with adrenaline instead of the war drugs. That is the EpiPen. It is a Cold War weapon defense, refitted for a lunchbox. The technology that was born to save a soldier from sarin was quietly repackaged to save a 9-year-old from a cookie. Same spring. Same hidden needle. Same 3 seconds. Same brilliant, brutal simplicity designed for the worst moment of a person's life. It reached the American public in the late 1980s, and for his design work, Sheldon Kaplan received a National Award for Excellence, handed out at the highest level. A rare moment of recognition. The original device he designed now sits in a museum collection, preserved as a landmark of American design. But here is the part that should sit heavy in your chest. Kaplan never got rich from it. He was an employee. The patent belonged to the company, not the man. He drew a salary, did brilliant work, and moved on. The device he created would one day be sold for hundreds of dollars a dose and generate billions. And the engineer who dreamed it up died in 2009, comfortable but not wealthy, remembered by almost no one outside his own family. Which raises the question this whole story has been building toward. If the drug is more than a century old and the device was invented decades ago by a salaried engineer, then why, in America, does the thing that saves that child's life cost what it costs? That's where the story turns dark. And it turns dark on our watch, in our lifetime, not in some distant German lab. Let's do some simple math because the numbers tell a story that words can't soften. The adrenaline inside an EpiPen costs a few dollars. The molecule is over a century old. Nobody owns it. The device Sheldon Kaplan designed was invented decades ago. Its core patents ran out long before most of us ever heard the word EpiPen. So you have an old drug, a few dollars worth, sitting inside an old device. By every logic, you'd expect this should be one of the cheapest life-saving tools in the entire pharmacy. In the year 2007, a company acquired the rights to the EpiPen. At that time, a 2-pack cost around $100. Already not cheap for what's inside it, but livable, manageable. The kind of thing a family plans around. By the summer of 2016, that same 2-pack cost more than $600. Read that again. Same drug, same device, same few dollars of adrenaline. The price went up more than 500% in under a decade, while nothing about the product itself meaningfully changed. Not the molecule, not the mechanism, not the science. Just the number on the receipt. And here's who felt it. Not corporations. Parents. Parents of children with severe allergies who don't get to opt out. This isn't a luxury. It's not a vitamin you can skip. When your child can die from a bite of the wrong food, the EpiPen is not optional, and it expires, which means you have to buy it again every single year whether you used it or not. You need one at home, one at school, one in the car, one with grandma. Families were suddenly looking at over $1,000 a year, every year, just to keep a child alive at a birthday party. People started rationing. That's the word that should stop you cold. Rationing. Parents letting the expiration date slide, praying the old one still worked. Splitting packs, skipping the spare for the school. Choosing between the device that stops their child from suffocating and, well, everything else a family needs money for. In the richest country on earth, families were gambling with a 9-year-old's airway because of a price on a piece of plastic. The public did not stay quiet. There was outrage, and it was loud, and it reached the place these things go when they get loud enough. The head of the company was called before Congress in 2016 to explain, under oath in front of the country, how a life-saving device that costs a few dollars to fill came to cost more than $600 to buy. The whole thing became a symbol, not just of one product, but of something a lot of us have felt in a doctor's office or at a pharmacy counter, staring at a bill that makes no sense. The feeling that somewhere between the discovery and the drugstore, something that was supposed to be about healing had quietly become about something else. And I want to be careful here because I'm a physician, not a prosecutor, and I'm going to stick to what the record actually shows. The record shows the price increase. The record shows the congressional hearing. The record shows that a year later, the company reached a settlement with the government over how the product had been classified in a federal program, a classification that had reduced what the company owed to taxpayers. That settlement was hundreds of millions of dollars. Those are facts on the public record. I'll let you sit with them and draw your own conclusions, because you're an adult and you don't need me to tell you how to feel. But I'll offer you one thought, as a doctor who has spent his life inside this system. There's a long straight line running through this entire story, and it's a line of people trying to save other people. Richer trying to understand why bodies collapse. Takamine and Abel trying to pull a healing crystal out of a gland. The asthma doctors watching a patient breathe again. Kaplan, the quiet engineer, staying late to figure out how a shaking hand could save its own life. Every one of them, whatever their flaws, was pointed at the same thing. Keep the person alive. And then, near the very end of that long line, the story bends, not toward the patient, toward the price. And that bend is not an accident of chemistry or a quirk of biology, it's a choice. Human beings made it in a boardroom on purpose. The good news, and there is good news, is that the story didn't end there. The outrage did something. Competition returned. Cheaper versions came to market. And medicine kept moving, the way it always does, toward the next accident, the next better idea, the next quiet engineer working late. Because the device in that kitchen drawer in Ohio was never the final chapter. It was just the best answer we had for a while. There's a newer answer now. And it changes the shape of this whole story. If you've stayed with me this far, all the way to the end of this story, then I want to ask you for something small. Subscribe to the channel. Come back and spend time with us, the way you did today. We tell these stories, the real ones, the forgotten ones, the accidents that quietly changed medicine. And we do it for people like you, people who'd rather understand the world than just be told about it. That's the whole reason this channel exists, and I say people like you deliberately, because if you're still here, you're a certain kind of person. You're old enough to have sat in a waiting room and felt that particular fear. You've paid a medical bill that didn't make sense. You've watched someone you love get sick, and you've learned that the difference between comfort and panic is often just understanding what's actually happening. That's who these stories are for, not for the crowd that wants noise, for the ones who still want to know how things really work. So let me tell you how this one keeps working. Because the EpiPen was never the final word. For almost 40 years, the answer to anaphylaxis was a needle. A brilliant needle, Kaplan's needle, but a needle all the same. And a needle has a problem that has nothing to do with the science and everything to do with being human. People are afraid of it. Parents hesitate. Teenagers won't carry a bulky device in their pocket. Babysitters freeze at the thought of stabbing a child's leg. And in an emergency, hesitation is the enemy. Every second the hand waits, the throat closes further. For decades, we accepted that fear as the price of survival. The tool worked, so you learned to press through the terror. But medicine has a habit, the same habit that runs through this entire story, of refusing to accept the gap, of asking, quietly, is there a better bridge? And recently, there is one. A version of this rescue that requires no needle at all. A spray. You put it in the nose, the way you'd use a decongestant, and the same life-saving adrenaline crosses into the bloodstream and does its work. No stabbing, no hidden spring. No thigh, no jeans, no counting to 3 while a child screams. Just a spray in the nose, in a moment when a frightened person can barely think. Think about what that solves. It removes the last barrier that was never medical. The drug was never the problem. Kaplan proved the delivery could be simple, and now delivery becomes simpler still, so simple that the fear itself, the flinch, the hesitation, starts to disappear. The scared teenager will carry it, the nervous babysitter will use it. The gap between the dying body and the ordinary hand gets narrower than it has ever been. That's the pattern this whole story has been teaching us, quietly, the entire time. Medicine doesn't usually leap, it closes gaps. Someone finds the drug, someone else finds the disease, someone builds the bridge between them. And then, years later, someone builds a better bridge, and then a better one, each one reaching a little further toward the frightened person in the worst moment of their life. Richer named the enemy. Takamine and Abel isolated the weapon. The asthma doctors aimed it. Kaplan put it in a hand, and now a nasal spray puts it within reach of a hand too scared to hold a needle. Every step, the same direction. Closer to the patient, closer to the moment, closer to the person alone on the cafeteria floor. And that raises a question worth sitting with as we come to the end. If this story is really a chain of accidents, a jellyfish, a bug spray, a Cold War contract, then how much of the medicine that keeps us alive was ever planned at all? How much of it came from someone looking for something else entirely and paying attention when the wrong answer turned out to be the right one? That's the thread I want to pull one last time before we finish. Because when you follow it all the way back, the EpiPen stops being a story about a device. It becomes a story about something much harder to hold. Go back to the drawer in Ohio, the plastic tube, waiting. For most of this hour, it looked like an object, a device, a piece of medical technology with a strange origin. But by now you know it isn't really an object at all. It's the end of a rope, and the rope runs back through more than a century of human hands. Pull on it and you feel the weight of a dog dying on a rich man's yacht, teaching a French scientist that the body can turn on itself. Pull further and you feel two men on opposite sides of the ocean, fighting over the name of a crystal neither of them fully understood. Further still, a room of asthma patients breathing again, and a German chemist recoiling from the poison he never meant to make, and a soldier in a field learning to save his own life through his uniform. And near the very end, an engineer working late, whose name almost no one knows, building the bridge that carried all of it into your hand. None of them were trying to save that boy in the cafeteria. That's the thing, not one of them. Richer wanted immunity, Takamine wanted a surgical tool, Schroeder wanted a better bug spray, Kaplan wanted to save a soldier from a war that never came. Every single one of them was looking somewhere else when they found the piece that mattered. And yet, thread by thread, accident by accident, their unrelated failures and side discoveries and wrong turns wove themselves into the one small thing that lets a mother sleep at night, knowing that if the worst happens at a birthday party, she has 3 seconds and a button and a fighting chance. That's what the tube in the drawer really is. It's 100 years of people looking for something else, and paying attention when the wrong answer turned out to be the right one. We like to tell ourselves that progress is a straight line, that smart people set out to solve a problem and then solve it. But this story, and honestly most of medicine, doesn't work that way. The map got drawn by people who were lost. The cure came from a poison. The lunchbox got its protection from a battlefield. The most reliable rescue we ever built for a frightened child was designed for a frightened man in a war. There's something almost unbearable in that, if you let yourself feel it. The idea that the thing which will one day save your life, or your grandchild's, might be sitting right now in some laboratory, mislabeled, misunderstood, discovered by someone chasing a completely different question. The antidote already made, the lock not yet found. Richer had the cure years before he knew there was a disease shaped like it. How many of those are out there right now, waiting for someone to notice? I don't have an answer for that. I'm not sure anyone does. But I know this. The next time you see one of those little tubes, in a purse, in a drawer, clipped to a backpack heading out the door to school, you'll see it differently now. You'll know it isn't just plastic and adrenaline. It's Richer and Takamine and Abel and Schrader and Kaplan, all of them, all their accidents, all their years, gathered into one honest promise. That when a body decides to turn on itself, a frightened hand can turn it back. A dog on a yacht, a cookie in a cafeteria. The same molecule standing between a person and the dark. If this story moved something in you, do one thing before you go. Share it with 5 people, 5. The ones you'd trust to save your life in a field, and the ones whose lives you'd want to save. Because a story like this is a small kind of medicine too, and it only works if it's passed hand to hand. Then subscribe and stay with us, because there are more of these than you could ever guess, and we're going to tell them one at a time. And leave me a comment. Not a polite one. An honest one. Tell me what this story stirred up in you, what you didn't know, what you'll never see the same way again. and tell me what we should follow next. Some forgotten cure, some accident that changed everything. Because if this hour taught us anything, it's that the most important stories are almost never the ones anybody set out to tell. I'll be here. Let's find the next one together.